Welcome, guys. I think most people in here know one another. This is the third year already, is that right, Jen? 3 years of Greenbag lunches?
2, 3?
Three.
This is the third year. Three together.
Yeah.
At least 2.
Fun about
Between 2 and 3.
Good to see you all. Excellent topic today, so thanks for organizing this, guys. Talking about labor rights. So my understanding of sustainability, greatly influenced by the good work of the office, is how do we sustain our relationships, of course, right? You guys have all talked about this in your classes and together. And so for me, those relationships, I study religion and food. Those relationships go all the way down to soil, and all the way out to the people picking the food for us. And I think to me, this is the leading edge of our concern about farm issues now, is how the workers treated. So you guys will be talking about that today. So I think really good, really relevant topic. We have Shaundra Young from Migrant Unit of South Carolina Legal Services. We'll talk about your perspective on migrant labor rights. Dr. Helen Delfield from Poli-Sci, expert in human rights and Southeast Asian politics, and you do research, which you'll talk about as well, in Southeast Asia on this stuff, right? Great. And then Michael Edmonds from East Coast Migrant Head Start Project. Personally, very interested to hear a lot more about that, and Family Service Coordinator within that. And drove all night from DC, so maybe we should start with you and work this way, so you're mentally ready. So 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll open up for question and answer.
Okay. Well, so I don't know if y'all know Head Start was a program that was started under Johnson. It's part of the Great Society. It serves children 6 weeks to 5 years old to better prepare them for kindergarten and first grade when they start. I work for East Coast Migrant Head Start Project, which serves specifically the children of migrant and a few seasonal farm workers. We're in 11 states up and down the East Coast, from Alabama to about New York. We have 5 centers here in South Carolina, on Johns Island, Walterboro, Beaufort, Manning, and Lake City. So I'm a family services coordinator. What I do is I do enrollments, but I also am a liaison for the families in the community. Charleston is rather rare, I think, for this county to have, although, like you say, it is changing very rapidly, to have as many migrant farm workers this close to a city with this much access is kind of odd. It's different. So out in the country, it's a little bit more, my main concern is access to, in Spanish, to resources, whether that be DSS, police department, hospital. That's kind of what I do on a daily basis, is a liaison for the families. We have, just to finish off, we have a parent committee, each center. It's the president of our parent committee is on a policy council, which meets in Raleigh, where our headquarters are. Last October, they met and made a Farm Worker Bill of Rights. They all got together and voted. I thought it'd be interesting if I just read this quick to y'all, because this is coming directly from the mouths of migrant farm workers. So the preamble says, farm workers plant and harvest the fruits and vegetables that provide the United States of America with a safe and secure source of food. We produce these fruits and vegetables under very difficult circumstances. We accept this reality. However, we believe every farm worker has the following basic rights. We have the right to not be fired when we are sick, work for farmers who do not deceive the inspectors, be paid for all the hours we work, affordable housing, the cost of which is reflective of the condition of the housing and the condition of which meets standards of human decency, higher wage rates when we work overtime, payment of wages and medical bills when we are injured on the job, work in fields free from the effects of pesticides and other poisons, not be discriminated against in employment opportunities, sanitary portable bathrooms when working in the fields, reasonable breaks during the workday for water and shade, wages reflective of the difficulty of the work we perform, live without fear of separation from our children, information about our existing legal protections, government enforcement of our existing legal protections, and advocate for ourselves without the fear of reprisal. So, that's what we do.
This sounds an awful lot like the first efforts by unions to establish rights for
no, and it's shocking. It's like, like get paid for the hours we work. That's something we consider kind of a fundamental right here. But.
So I'm Helen Delfield. I am kind of here under 2 different hats. I was born on a farm. I was one of the last generations of people where I come from who grew up doing farm work. And we did have a small dairy farm until I was about 12, at which point the economics of the situation shifted so that we no longer ran dairy. And my father went more and more to working as a mechanic. He's while still doing some farm work. So I've been a personal participant in the shift from an agricultural-based economy, which the United States was in 1950, to the sort of city-based economy that we are now, with only 2% of Americans involved in farm work at all anymore. So that's one part, and those things brought me to my current study, my research in human rights. And I work mostly in Southeast Asia, but of course these issues are really prevalent, as I hope we'll have a chance to discuss about NAFTA in North America. How farm life and farm work differs from other ways of seeing an economy, and how that has shifted pretty radically over the last 20 years in not a way that benefits people who did farm work. So my specialty in human rights law is focused on rural poverty and rural development in Cambodia, especially right now. But we see a lot of parallels to what's going on in Mexico, to what's going on in what we call the fourth world of displaced people within the United States. This often refers to Native Americans, it refers to migrant workers, it refers to people who work within the first world as third world actors. So those are the two different things I have to contribute today.
And I'm Shaundra, and I'm with the South Carolina Legal Services, and I'm actually the supervising migrant farm worker attorney. And basically, within our unit, we deal with representing migrant and seasonal farm workers, primarily farm workers who come in under what's called an H-2A visa, which is an agricultural visa. We deal with some farm workers that come in under an H-2B visa, and H-2B visas are just generally the people who are coming in as guest workers, working at hotels and things of that nature as guest workers. But the area that we can do are the ones that deal with pine straw gathering, Christmas tree planting, reforestation. Because of our grant restrictions, it has to be something dealing with agriculture. We also can, depending on their type of visa, as long as they have any other legal means for being in the United States and they're a farm worker, then we can represent them. We cannot represent in legal services anyone who's undocumented unless they are a farm worker who is a victim of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and sexual harassment. In that respect, if they're an undocumented individual, then we can represent them. The issues that we primarily deal with are wage issues, just kind of piggybacking on what he was saying as far as, wages when due. You would be surprised how they're, not getting paid, or, their hours are being changed, when it's time to report, how many hours they've made, or maybe a crew leader, which is the equivalent of maybe the supervisor in between the actual grower or the farmer and the farm worker, are charging fees that maybe the grower does or doesn't know about. $10 for cleaning fee, $10 to ask the crew leader to cash their checks for them on their behalf, or you have to buy food. We've had situations where we've seen crew leaders own, food trucks or whatever, and are requiring the farm workers to, spend a certain amount of money per month, and only, to get food from them, but the farm worker wants to buy their own food, so they pay this money because they feel like they're required to, because if not, then the crew leader will put in a bad word and not invite them to come back the next year. So they're paying for that food, and then they go to Walmart or whatever and pay for, the food they actually want to eat. So those are the kind of cases. The wages, transportation, they're supposed to be reimbursed, for any type of fees that they paid to get here. A lot of housing violations, with regard to that, and we deal with the Immigration and Nationality Act for the H-2A workers, the Agricultural Worker Protections Act for any non-H-2A workers, OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Hazard Act, for housing, field sanitation, and then the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Act for pesticides. So that's my contribution to the panel for today.
Thanks, guys. We have a list of questions that were prepared, but also we'll open up. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with one actually for Michael and Shaundra. If you guys could please share what skills are essential for your job and maybe how you got those and then relate that maybe to a college education. Then specifically, if you could walk us through maybe a typical day or week. Because hearing what you guys both said is very not my normal realm of what I'm doing every day. And I think probably most of us in here don't even realize there's migrant labor issues right on Johns Island, right? Yeah. So maybe if you could do that, we could start with that.
Okay, basically I have a bachelor's degree in political science and went to law school at the John Marshall Law School, and my minor is in Spanish, and I participated in a program. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It was student action with Farmworkers when I was an undergrad, and it's basically interns or students. They go and they intern at different places during the summer that deal with migrant and seasonal farm workers. And I did my internship during that time at Migrant Head Start on Johns Island. But I had no idea at that time, even when I did it, that I was going to end up being an attorney for migrant farm workers. I just kind of accidentally fell into it, and just all of the background just kind of went that way. Basically, our typical day in our office is based out of Charleston, but we are the only agency that deals with migrant farm worker legal rights issues and representing them in court, and we cover the entire state. So we have outreach workers at Lee, and we have another outreach worker, and so a typical day for them is basically doing outreach. We go everywhere, all the way up to Rock Hill and all the way down to Beaufort, Walterboro, and things of that nature. We've crossed over into Savannah at some points in time. Overnight outreach, weekend
Is that an illegal migration?
I'm sorry?
Is that an illegal migration?
A little bit.
So what, you give out cards? Or
We give out cards, we give out brochures, everything is bilingual on farm worker rights, and so we spend the night. Like I said, we do over the weekend. It's easier for us to talk to a lot of the workers in the evening because they work during the day, that kind of thing, and then if we get a case, and that's when I come in.
Okay.
And we normally file everything in federal court for migrant farm worker issues.
Where's that?
It depends on the county where you would actually file it, but it's just a higher level than doing it in state court, because hopefully you'll get an impartial judge or a judge that doesn't have any bias in that actual area. That doesn't ever really happen, but
North Carolina, where's the closest federal for us?
We have our own federal court here. I mean, the Supreme Court is actually in Columbia.
Okay.
So we have different federal district courts depending on what area. Charleston has one, Greenville has one, Rock Hill has one, that kind of thing. Saluda County has one. Just depends on where the actual violation happened, and then we file there.
Well, I was a history major at the College of Charleston, graduated in 2005, and then I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2.5 years in a little village on the Mexican border in Guatemala named Tacana. A little serendipitous, but I came back to school and got a master's in bilingual interpreting here at College of Charleston. Interestingly enough, I lived about 6 kilometers from the Mexican border, and I dealt a lot with migrant labor and immigration to the United States. It was a really prevalent issue just because where I lived, and I kind of work with the same population now. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of serendipitous that that's kind of an area where most of our people come from, the Chiapas, southern Mexico, Guatemala area. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
A normal day, I think I try not to plan anything, because if I have something planned, then it's gonna be, I try to do enrollments, scheduled things, trainings for parents. We do trainings at the camps as well, stuff like that. It kind of ends up where I get to work and we've gotten a call and I kind of go deal with what I need to deal with. So, like I said, we work a lot with DSS. I work mainly in Colleton County. I can be in Charleston though, in Manning, Lake City. whether that be the hospital if somebody's sick and they just need interpreting, or courthouse, immigration, whoever that needs to be, even Mexican consulate, I mean, so, but yeah.
Follow up real quick. Obviously Spanish, really important. And then I heard both of you mention grants. So is it tough to get money to do as much of what you guys are doing grant-based? Is that hard to find people willing to support these issues?
We get our grant money. Our grant comes specifically from Legal Services Corporation, which is pretty much who funds the majority of a lot of legal services. Our migrant unit is just a subset of the general program. We have a general South Carolina legal services that deals with family law issues, consumer issues, and SE Help. I don't know if you guys have seen the commercial for SE Help where people need help saving their homes if they're having mortgage issues. So that's our general program, and we get funding from the Legal Services Corporation. And then there's a migrant grant that funds our migrant unit, which comes from Legal Services Corporation. So we don't necessarily, we have to apply for the grant every 2 years, but it's not something that we have to find for people to support. It's a pool of money out there that we just have to let them know there's a need for help for migrant farm workers in South Carolina.
Can you tell us about who funds Legal Services Corporation? Where did all that money come from?
I'm assuming that it comes from the government. I don't normally deal with the higher end of it because we have executive director and we have board of directors and they deal with all of that. I just give them the information as far as these are our stats and these are how many people how many people we've helped, and these are the awards and settlements that we've gotten back. So I just provide them the information, and then we have a director of compliance that actually deals with the grant funding and all of that stuff.
We receive our funding from the federal government, so that's always fun nowadays. But we used
Last
to.
week was stressful.
Yeah, well, luckily we received our funding in July, so that our fiscal year started July 1, so we weren't exactly affected by that. Like every Head Start across the country, we were affected by the sequester. We had a 5% across the board cut. Things that used to be just, signed and passed immediately. Head Start didn't used to be even 2 years ago, it wasn't a controversial thing, but I mean, we are federally funded, and the rest is volunteer hours or, money, whatever. But the majority of it comes from the federal government.
Helen, so if you could define then migrant labor, since you've traveled and you mentioned some similarities between fourth worlds domestically and then maybe some of the people you're encountering where you do your research. So if you could define migrant labor for us.
Yeah, I really think we can't. I mean, the whole idea of migrant labor carries in the words an assumption that there is this free-floating pool of labor sitting out there in the world someplace that is in search of work. This is not the case. This is a created problem. And it's created, we can trace a lot of the creation of this problem to 1993 with NAFTA. When we saw NAFTA go through, there are two different things that happened, two major things. There are many, many, many things that happened. What's NAFTA? North American Free Trade Agreement, which unified the United States, Canada, and Mexico in one giant free trade organization. CAFTA was soon to follow as a proposal. This is all enabled by the fast track authority the executive part of our government has sought in order to make these agreements without having to do a lot of congressional oversight. Congressional oversight would be very helpful because these policies, as I will talk about in a second, have a lot of local impacts, So the two things I kind of want to hit amongst the many, many effects that NAFTA had was that, all farmers in all three countries were worse off on the whole because of it, which is exactly the opposite of the sales pitch of NAFTA. It allowed what we call dumping of commodities of American commodities in Mexico, undercutting local corn prices, undercutting local pepper prices, undercutting local tomato prices, undercutting local squash prices, forcing small farmers, until 2000, I think, more people were employed in the agricultural sector in Mexico than anywhere else. as small farmers, as people who had, small plots of corn, small plots of, tomatoes, small plots of different things. With the dumping of American commodities on the marketplace at that point, we saw a vast change from the ability of those people to support themselves to an inability of them to support themselves on those. So if they were not able to make a subsistence living, they weren't able to get enough cash out of their crops in order to get to make a life for themselves. So what we saw is the second thing that happened to those particular farmers was that NAFTA required that foreign investors were specially protected in a way that they had not been since the revolution. The revolution said that no farmer could have their land taken away from them because of debt in Mexico. And so after NAFTA, foreign investors who were investing in the Mexican economy demanded protections from those sorts of provisions. So that was repealed. So now small farmers in Mexico that were heavily, heavily pressured by these dumped commodities became, for the first time, if they had carried too much bad debt, could have their land taken away from them. So we've seen, in the first 10 years after NAFTA, we saw about a 20% rise in the Mexican population as a whole. Only 6% of that was happening in the countryside. And people in the country were actually having more kids. We saw 44% growth in the cities. What that implies that there's this giant, in 10 years, movement from the countryside to the cities. Giant. And that sort of mass migration cannot be absorbed in any sort of normal economic times, much less the drain of the resources of small farmers and their subsequent inability to make it as small farmers. They became urbanized, some of them. Many of them started looking for work in the United States. We basically created this pool of people who were unemployed and desperate and then offered them, marginal work up in the north. So that was one effect. It also affected American farmers, and if anybody's interested in those effects, I think that's a really important part of the story as well. But I'll stop there because I've definitely had it on too long.
No, and I was just wondering if you would. Obviously, when I was in Guatemala, that was a big issue because CAFTA was because like you said,
Central American Free Trade Agreement.
I'm sorry. Because subsistence farmers, like you say, if they're badly subsidized American agribusiness, they're not going to be able to obviously keep up. But I don't know what you think about NAFTA, but it seems to me that just looking at the last, I don't know how long is it now, almost 20 years. Do you see that it's almost making? To me, it seems like it's making a divide in Mexico between the North and the South, where you have. It seems to me like you have all this foreign industry, car manufacturers, jeans, whatever, in the North that are putting a lot of factories, which NAFTA allowed them to do, and yet the South is not seeing that development at all. And like, if you look at like presidential elections in Mexico, I just think it's very interesting. I mean, it's almost like pre-Civil War, where the divide between the different ideologies is so different now, isn't it?
One of the interesting things about that, though, is that divide was there before. In the South, we had more subsistence farming, and in the North, we had more market farming. So when we see this sort of, ready market for industrialized workers, we see that coming out of a place that had already industrialized farming a little bit more than the South, and so that's one of the distinctions we see, which is why people in Costa Rica are far more worried about CAFTA than people in Guatemala, right? Well, obviously CAFTA has dramatic effects everywhere, but Costa Rica is a far more industrialized agricultural sector. So those workers are going to have to change their lifestyle more. They're, small farmers in Costa Rica are under threat than in Guatemala, because Guatemala, they're still largely doing subsistence agriculture on farms. Absolutely. Right?
And I would say, where I was living.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's obviously they have their mega cities too, but it's.
Might be a correlation too with indigenous.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you see who you see. I guess we'll get there, but that's.
Get there.
Yeah, well, Billy, if you don't mind, Shaundra, actually, if I can follow up on that. So everybody got the political snapshot of what created this pool of migrant labor, which we might want to critique that term, is what you're saying there, right? Or at least understand why this labor is there.
It's not ahistorical.
Yeah.
There's a very strong history. It's not just this floating pool that's always existed of unemployed people.
Yeah.
You know?
So the history that creates that, maybe Shaundra, you could pick up and talk to us about the people that you work with. Who's the percentage of farmers in South Carolina considered illegal and what that might mean versus the percentage with legal status, their average salary, the working conditions. So how did they get here in South Carolina? What's that process look like? And then what's your experience as they're here working on farms?
I know for the H-2A workers that we see, a lot of them, what the farmers have to do is they have to apply for the work. And the actual law, which is the H-2A law, that's under the Immigration and Nationality Act, that's there to say what H-2A workers' rights are, is really not in place for the H-2A worker. It's actually in place for the U.S. citizen. And it became in place because of the whole idea of foreign labor is coming to take our jobs type situation. And so it's put in place so that growers can't bring in foreign labor and pay them less than minimum wage and drive the overall wage of the economy down. So it's really in place for the U.S. citizen. It's not actually even in place for the H-2A worker. And actually under it, the H-2A worker doesn't even have a private right to file a lawsuit. We actually have to get them in court by saying that when the grower applies for workers and they're basically saying there aren't any U.S. workers to do the job, government, can we please have foreign workers from wherever? They're basically, you know, they have to submit their work order, which says these are how many workers that we need. This is how much they get paid, which the minimum wage, I believe right now is $7.25. It's $7.25, but then we also have the adverse wage effect rate, which is in every state. And for South Carolina, it's $9.30. $9.78. See, she knows more than I do. So they actually have to make the higher of the two. So in South Carolina, they have to make $9.78. Now, in a place like North Carolina, each county has a different A-word, what we call it. But for South Carolina, luckily, it's just one blanket rate. And so what we have to do is go in and say, this work order that the farmer has submitted for workers is a contract, and therefore the H-2A worker has a claim of breach of contract because the farmer didn't uphold all their end of the bargain. So that's as far as the wages are concerned. The H-2A worker is normally coming on, and on average, we see the majority of people are coming from Mexico. We do see some people that come from Guatemala, but the majority, as far as that we've seen in South Carolina, they come from Mexico, and they basically come from Mexico. They meet up in Monterrey, and then when I first started doing this, what was happening is the farm worker would pay for their own way all the way to South Carolina, their visa and everything like that. And then the grower is supposed to reimburse them. Now, because I think we've made such a big stink about them having to reimburse the worker for their travel, we've seen a lot of growers just turning to buying the bus ticket for the worker from Mexico to South Carolina. So that's how the H-2A workers are getting here. Non-H-2A workers, which are more of the seasonal workers, we see a lot of Haitian Creole farm workers that come up from Florida and follow what's called a East Coast stream. There's an East Coast and there's a West Coast and there's a mid stream, and they basically start in Florida. A lot of the Haitian Creole or just anyone who's non-H-2A and they're working, and they kind of follow up Florida. They follow the harvest and they follow the crop all the way up the East Coast. And these people they normally have their home based here in the United States on the East Coast in some form or fashion in Florida. So they have their own means of transportation, and they know exactly where labor camps are and that kind of thing. So that's how those particular workers get here. As far as undocumented workers, we have seen a decline in undocumented workers ever since our South Carolina immigration reform came into place. So I know a lot of undocumented workers are avoiding South Carolina, for fear that they may be stopped by, someone and get deported and things of that. It was 2010. I'm trying to remember. I know there was a point where it was supposed to be mirrored after Arizona, and then we were waiting to see what Arizona said before we can move forward on enforcing ours. And then Arizona went forward with their version of the law. I think Georgia also had a version. And then we also did, so in all of that, these undocumented workers, which is why a lot of the farms have closed down in our Lowcountry areas, because the worker population, it's not there. And basically, one of the main things was the racial profiling part of it, saying that, anyone can be stopped for any, for a reason, if it's a traffic stop, and subsequently, if the officer felt the need, there wasn't any real requirement that stated this is when you can and can't ask someone whether or not they have, papers to be here or whatever the case may be. So they were arguing that that was racial profiling. So that was one of the issues. Another issue is that there's a G28 program, which ordinarily the only officers that can deal with immigration issues are directly working for the United States Customs and Immigration or ICE, Immigration and Customs and Enforcement. And so this G28 program allows for local police officers to act as auxiliary officers of ICE. So they're giving these local police officers, and I don't know if there's more than one, but I know for a fact, I believe it's somewhere in Beaufort. I think Beaufort is one of the areas that has this program that's being enforced, where you can stop people and that kind of thing. So this is the thing, our immigration reform. And there's a lot of different facets to it, which another one, which is also a reason for the closing of a lot of the farms, is the requirement that you have to go through the E-Verify. And that's the thing where you have to, the actual employer has to verify through this national program that you are actually here, for whatever reason, here legally. So that's another thing. People don't want to deal with the E-Verify. They don't want to go through that. They don't want to take the chance of being stopped and deported. So a lot of our undocumented labor has gone down because of our Immigration Reform Act.
Real quick, I just want to follow up, but then, yeah, so based on what you said, so if we go to Johns Island and we see the assumption would be immigrant labor or migrant labor, they're getting almost $10 an hour if they're documented?
If they're documented.
I have a little different experience than
Because that doesn't sound too bad, actually.
I don't work for, we don't ask legal status as part of our enrollments or whatever. If you held me down, I would say the vast majority do not have legal status here. All undocumented, I should say. We do, you kind of see a certain amount, so you see, there's different ways you get paid, right? So there's no H-2A workers in Charleston or Walterboro or Beaufort areas. That's more upstate. So here it's more through a crew leader where he'll maybe be given, $30,000 at some level, but and then he divvies out the money to the workers. In some way that kind of insulates the farmer from, Jose told me everybody was good, so it's like, it kind of insulates them from dealing with that. I would say, if you help me down, I would say the vast majority. We have a few U visas, which is like religious persecution, things like that, but mainly for domestic violence. So we have a few U visas, but on the whole, our population is majority undocumented. I think that's what you would find on Johns Island if you went to the labor camps, probably, or anywhere around the southeast, honestly. We do federal income. You have to meet poverty, below the federal poverty guidelines to qualify for our program. Our average family made about $14,000 last year. So.
I mean, what they're supposed to get per hour, like you said, it doesn't sound like a bad idea. However, it all boils down to, they were promised a certain amount of hours per week, and our issue is that they were told, if you look at the work order, they were told they were going to get 40 hours a week, or at least 35 to 40 hours a week, and then you come here and you can run into the situation where we're only working 2 hours a day, so all of that comes into play, where it's not just a guaranteed, okay, they're making $9.78 an hour, they're getting 40 hours a week. The H-2A workers aren't, they're not afforded overtime. So however many hours they work, they're not going to get overtime pay, period, because it's not in the law. And that kind of situation, and like you said, it goes by hours, and there's also piece rate, and that's how a lot of the workers or the crew leaders or the growers get around that. And it's like how many you get paid by the bucket, by how many pieces that you pick, and so that is supposed to average out to at least the minimum wage. But then again, a lot of people don't keep their pay stubs; they don't get pay stubs, and those type of things are also required by the law as well. And you would probably know more about the undocumented population only because our grant restricts us from representing anyone that's undocumented. So we can't even deal with anybody in that area. So for us, we do see some H-2A workers in the Lowcountry area, but the majority are the Haitian Creole farm workers that come up from Florida.
No, and I think that at some level undocumented are maybe slightly more vulnerable because they don't have any legal protection to, like, where do you go to complain, right? Do you say, let me tell you something, I'm here, you know, I'm undocumented in the United States and I'm not getting paid a fair wage. You say, okay, you know, people are not going to go out and do that. What we see in most of the Lowcountry is people, like you say, getting paid by piecemeal. So you get paid by the bucket. If it's raining, if the crop gets damaged, I mean, we have, if you're picking cucumbers, for instance, I would not suggest that because, you know, we have families making $25 a day picking cucumbers, you know, that's 2 people. So, I mean, if you're getting paid by the bucket, that can be tough. And I think because of the level of income, you know, they talk about most Americans, what if they didn't get paid in 2 weeks, they'd be, you know, not having any money. Some of these people, it's 3 days. You know, they don't have food to eat. So it's a very vulnerable population, I think, because
So if you could hold that
the
thought.
employer manages to take some money back from the wages for things like equipment, or, you know, housing, or food, or, you know, standard company store crap.
No, and I won't mention any names or places, but we have a camp in South Carolina. Next to it is a gas station, right, which is owned by the farmer's brother. Okay, so I mean we have this long history of sharecropping and store bucks and all this, you know, that we're trying to get away from. I guess now we don't think that was a great idea, but
Some of us don't.
well, okay, that's just true. Some people probably miss the old times, but I think that you know, imagine if you're in the middle of nowhere, you don't know where you are, but you just got dropped off to this camp to work. The only place you can buy is at the farmer's. You're literally giving your money right back to him at a higher rate. His gas is 27 cents higher than any other gas around, you know? So I mean, that's just, that happens a lot. And the law says, South Carolina law says that no farmer can sell food or goods to his workers because of sharecropping, because of that. But like you say, if your brother's running the store, you know,
Or the crew leader or anything like that.
yeah,
You know,
the
that's
crew
how a
leader's
lot
not
of-
allowed to be there, actually.
That's how a lot of them get around it.
Yeah, so we've had, you hold it for a second, but real quick, if you guys can hold that though, because I think maybe towards the end I want to get back to what we can do as consumers to maybe work on that, right? So good point to keep in the back of mind, yeah.
I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on, you mentioned a number of local farms have been shut down. I just assume it's because they can't afford to keep going, paying a higher wage, or people don't want to work there because of the wages and all that. Which seems to be in contrast, I'm new here to this area, a big emphasis on buy local. And I'm just wondering, I mean, if you can talk about some of the farms that are being shut down and the reaction to that, and, you know, give a little description of the farms.
Just based on what I understand, and you may, like I said, you know, as far as the undocumented population, from what I understand, I don't know, other than people like us that come to these kind of forums and that actually work in the migrant farm worker population, outside of us, it's like a little bubble. I don't find very many people talking about where their food comes from. So people just, you know, they go into, you know, Walmart and things of that nature that aren't conscious of where their food comes from, or sustainability, or composting, or people just not in that type of bubble. I don't think it even registers to them where their food comes from. So the fact that a farm closed on Johns Island, it doesn't affect them at all, because they're still going to go inside of Walmart and get their food just like they normally do. Now, for somebody like me who works with the migrant farm worker population, and knowing that that is a big pool or area where a lot of our clients come from, and to know that we would know that H-2A work order isn't coming, or that the East Coast Migrant Head Start had to be consolidated, and because it was, you know, more, I guess, individually operated. I don't know exactly how it goes, but I know they had to consolidate. There are a lot of centers that closed. We know a lot of health centers that closed because of they only cater to migrant farm workers. So that's, to me, how it's affected the area. It's affected farmers, you know, it's a lot of buy local, things of that nature, but I think it's more of the bigger farms, like the tomato growers and things of that nature, where it's affected.
Well, also, you have to remember that in the 10 years after NAFTA came into effect, we had 30,000 small farms closed across the United States, and that was 10 times more than the previous 10 years. Sorry, 7 years after NAFTA, measuring from in 2000, we lost 30,000 family farms, and in the previous 10 years, we'd lost 3,000. So that was partly because of this really downward pressure on commodity prices. So family farms couldn't grow soybeans and corn for the same price that they had been growing them for before. And you can sustain that for a few years because most farmers have the capacity to absorb a couple bad years of prices. That's kind of built into the system is, farming sucks a lot. And so you can absorb a couple bad years. But when you get 7, 8 bad years in a row because of this new policy, you end up losing farms, lots of them. And that was in 2000. I didn't look up the figures for the last 10 years, but I think we've seen an acceleration. I know, I grew up with hundreds of small family farms, hundreds. 3 of them are still operating as family farms, and they're making it by doing this. They rent out everybody else's land. And so they are running 5,000 acres instead of the 300 that my family has. And so we're just seeing the absolute, and of course to do that, they're either mechanizing everything or they're hiring labor like this. So they have to bring down the cost of farming since NAFTA. We've seen a rapid acceleration of the loss of family farms. And this is one of those things, maybe it's to be desired. Maybe industrial farming is
I'm pretty sure that the whole agriculture industrial complex is having other, Monsanto and GMOs are certainly impacting that as well. And I think it's a very compelling story. And, I come from the West Coast where people have pretty much just, I don't want to say resigned because that's like, oh my gosh, fine. But they understand that, if we want farms to work and operate functionally, that there is, some labor and cost issues that aren't necessarily fair or right. Is it okay to pay a farm worker $10 an hour or $7 an hour? It's backbreaking, difficult work. But if we want $3.99 for a pint of strawberries, that's kind of something that we have to accept. And I just find it really ironic, coming here and seeing all of this, a pretty strong emphasis on, buy local first, which I think is great. And then we have a lot of local farms being shut down. I'm just wondering if
this is a stopgap back wall measure. The buy local, stay local, it's only 3 or 4 years old here,
right.
And it's because we're desperate.
Exactly. That's why the economy, things, I think it's only becoming a shock because things are more expensive in the grocery stores now. And I think that's why people are turning more towards this buy local and wanting to learn more about where their food is coming from and how the food is getting to their table, as opposed to in previous years.
No, I think partly Charleston, partly, in my opinion, partly Charleston, Johns Island is a lot of people are moving down here. I think that's part of it. If somebody comes and offers a farmer $10 million for their land, a lot of them say, like you say, farming is very tough. I mean, there's an interesting book called Bitter Fruit, I think it's called. It's called The High Price of America's Favorite Fruit or something like that. And it's about tomatoes in like the Immokalee area. I think it talks about the pressure is really coming from the top. It's not the farmers. So the farmers are being squeezed out because if, say, Taco Bell or somebody comes to you and says, we're going to buy all your tomato crop for this whole year. You don't have to negotiate, do anything. We're buying it all. But we're going to pay you 1 cent less a tomato or something like that than we did last year. But hey, we're buying it all. It's hard for the farmers to turn that down. Gas is more expensive. Where are they going to get squeezed? It's going to be the people picking. That's who's going to get affected the most by that price. So, I don't know. But I think it's becoming harder and harder to be a small farmer, absolutely.
And then the other thing, I can't remember the name of the movie. It's a movie I brought back, and if I remember, I'll send someone an email, but it's also talking about that small farmers being squeezed out because, like you said, they're manufacturing the seeds, and if the small farmer doesn't plant a particular seed, or if they go and try to harvest their own crop and take their own seeds like they used to back in the day and replant their own seeds, that's against the law. And I mean,
it's against the patent.
Yeah, it's against the patent.
Not against the law.
Which is a concern with CAFTA too, by the way.
Yeah, and I find that strange, because I always, I'm always an advocate for the farm worker. When I saw that movie, and I wish I could remember the name of it, and I saw that there was one, I feel like he was out of Arizona, and there was one grower still holding out, fighting the patent on, I think it was a soybean or something like that. I actually, that was one of the times I felt really bad, not knowing exactly what the growers are going through. And, like you said, it's going to trickle down to, the farm worker at some point in time, but it's going to have to come from somewhere.
No, my granddad's a pecan farmer in Saluda County, so I'm a little bit, but I mean, it is like, it's like you put all your money, as small farmers, you live season to season. Mm-hmm. You put all your money into the crop, you don't have any money until that starts coming back. I mean, it is tough. So small farmers, like you say, it's more and more where we're working with people like Lippman in Florida who have hundreds of thousands of acres across, 13, 14 states. In Mexico, they have a ton of farms. I mean, that's more what it seems to be going. 6L, well, old 6L. You'll notice these farms, I don't know about Monsanto's, but they change their names about every 5 to 6 years. It really helps with legal situations and things like that. So, it's like every 5 years of a new name, yeah.
The pushback is a small organic farmer, right? Because they're not tied to the Monsanto ADM seeds. They're not tied to the sort of chemicalized industrial production model of the corn and soybean farmers that we see. So the small organic farmers are, the buy local thing is a matter of survival for the family farms. That's the only way we're going to see family farms surviving. If you go out and buy your hog from the farmer. Mm-hmm. If you go out and buy your, tomatoes, your eggs, your chickens from the farmer, him or herself.
No, and there's people on Johns Island who've been doing that forever. Yep. I mean, there's especially a lot of small African American farmers like Freeman Farms and places like that where they're very diversified. They have a small area, but they grow all year long. They pick it themselves, and I mean
they don't grow corn and soybeans.
Exactly, no.
I mean that's a death for farmers. Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about basic economies of scale, and the labor that you guys are working with are on globalized economies of scale, commodity crops. Was your question answered enough?
Yeah. I just want to get a feel for the farms that are being shut down here. I mean.
Yeah, and honestly, this is not a dialogue Charleston's really has had about this, and it's. People know there's labor out on these islands, but it's like you were saying, it's not a huge concern for most people around here, unfortunately.
There are a couple organizations that are really engaged in this. Lowcountry, Local First, Grow Carolina. You guys probably know a few more, right? That are really trying to work on this. And of course, the farmers market is awesome.
Absolutely.
They're not real activists, but they are definitely engaged in trying to save local farmers.
But aren't they forced to sort of the same economic forces in order to compete? They have to drive, they have to pay workers the least amount possible, whether they're a family farm or not. I mean, couldn't family farms
with the H-2A worker, I think a lot of farms were closing because the H-2A process is difficult. Yeah. There are a lot of small little laws that are really a pain in the butt, for lack of a better term, and for all that they go through, the growers, to get the workers here, and then you miss a loophole, and then you're liable for whatever. I don't think they have more of a leeway. Like they can, they probably have it situated to where they have more local, because there are local people that are actually from South Carolina and are U.S. citizens that can go out and do this kind of work. It's just that the farmer doesn't have to worry about paying for anyone's housing and all this stuff. People come, they work, they go home, that kind of thing.
No, and there's 2 points. One, some of these farmers I've talked to farmers in Lake City area where, of course, you see that. I don't know if y'all know, but farmers are subsidized to grow soy and corn right now. That's what we want for some reason, the federal government decided.
Because they're now, instead of cows normally grazing on grass and things like that, they feed them corn, them and every other animal.
And I talk
politics of meat if you guys want.
I talked to one farmer the other day. I was calling him and I said, wow, you're not growing this year. He's in Lake City area, and he said, the government shut me down. They said my houses were too bad. I mean, part of it is DHEC is finally doing their job and saying you can't have people living in these conditions.
I'd like to ask my question sort of going on that. I've heard a lot of, there's been some sort of, it seems there's been some movement towards unionization, or at least some worker rights organizations, like the CIW in Florida, the United, California, United Fruit Workers? United Farm Workers. Farm Workers. So like, is there a counter trend? Are workers seeing that if they organize, if they work with organizations like your organizations, do they have that sort of ability to control or at least to lobby it to some extent for rights and higher wages and better conditions and so on. Maybe, yeah.
Real quick, I think part of the problem is with union and stuff like that is that there's, maybe because of NAFTA, like you're talking about these trends, if you're not there's people that'll take your place, do you know what I mean? I mean, there's a ready source of labor. So that's kind of scary. I think for politically, I feel like just on a micro level, just South Carolina where I live and work, I think we're kind of like have our eyes squinted and like, I don't want to see it, I don't want to see it, you know. But the truth is, it's here, it's happening. There's a large Hispanic population. I think the last 10 years we're the second fastest growing Hispanic population in all the states. It's harder, it's more expensive. You have to hire people that speak other languages. You know, I mean, I think that's part of my frustration is just, we kind of need to just admit that it's here and that it's happening, and I think that's hard. I mean, on a national level, I don't know if congressional districts are so gerrymandered now that you could probably get away with, I mean, you know, I think that, you know...
We're a right-to-work state anyways.
Oh, absolutely, you know, and...
South Carolina sort of stacked against organized labor.
To tackle a little bit, from a little bit different angle, from a much bigger lens, what Adrian's asking about is, I think one of the things that we're buying into here, and it's a big problem, is humans as homo economicus, as humans as workers instead of humans as humans. You know, by buying into the discourse that humans should be workers in some way instead of should be humans, I think we end up having these conversations much more easily and with a lot less ethical consideration for the parts of us that are not economic workers that shouldn't be sold, right? And so once we kind of fully engage in worker as human, you know, as human only interesting as far as they're a worker, as the extent to which we do that is the extent to which we end up enabling these processes of dehumanization of people who are inadequate workers in one way or another. And I think that's a huge problem in American society right now. I mean, we are not interested in hearing that you need to go off and watch your daughter's dance recital, you know, if you're not meeting your obligations. We're not interested in hearing about your weekend that you had planned if there's a job to be done. You know, we're not interested in your humanity in a large part in this society anymore. You know, and we talk about, you know, the bootstrappiness. You know, oh, I worked my way into this position, implying secretly that others didn't, right? That others are not adequate workers compared to you who managed to get the magical golden bonus of having insurance paid by your employer. You know, so there's this sense in which the humanness has been lost in the workerness.
Michael, did you anything else to add? And then Shaundra after.
Just to kind of answer your question in regards to whether or not there is any area for workers farm workers themselves to kind of be political advocates. From the legal standpoint, what we see, it's like pulling teeth to get a lot of these workers to step forward and complain about the conditions that they're working under, their housing conditions being horrendous, or they're working in the fields and they're not getting bathroom breaks, or there are laws within OSHA that deal with field sanitation requiring the grower to provide individual cups for each worker to drink out of in order to have water. You would just be shocked that actually has to be written down, that somebody would think, okay, we need to give them individual cups instead of having them all drink out of the same cup, or making sure that the porta potty or the bathroom facilities are within a certain amount of walking distance. You know, they could start down here at the beginning of the day and work all the way up here, you know, harvesting, and the grower never moves this porta potty. And then we've come across a lot of farm workers that use the restroom in the fields. And even despite all of these conditions, a lot of the farm workers feel like whatever they're dealing with here is far better than where they came from, which is the reason why they had to come here to work in the first place. And for somebody to complain, even though there are regulations that prohibit retaliation, meaning that if a worker comes forward and says they have a problem, the grower can't retaliate and say, well, you can't come back. They're already going to be retaliated against by the time we get moving and are able to get something moved through the legal system on their behalf. And 9 times out of 10, even if we file something, the worker is not going to want to come back anyway. So you have that aspect. They're afraid, they don't want to lose their jobs. We have a lot of workers that all come from the same town, and if one person says something, it jeopardizes the entire farm or the entire area where everyone comes from in regards to everyone losing their job because one person is labeled a troublemaker, then you guys are all labeled a troublemaker. So we find it really, really hard to get people to come forward and actually advocate for these kind of things in the way that they need to. Like, they may complain about it, or they may say to someone, what can I do? But they don't want to do anything unless they know, they may not understand our legal system and that things don't happen overnight. And so that's an issue as well. And then, like I said, they would rather continue to work under these conditions than to lose their only source of income altogether.
Oh, I think it's important to, I can only speak for the Southeast, but I think it's important too to realize, like, for our families at the center, we have maybe 250 families in South Carolina. I would say we're probably 95% from southern Mexico, Guerrero, Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Guatemala. I would say 80% of our families speak another language besides Spanish in the home. I don't think this is something that most people understand. They say they're Mexican, they speak Spanish, but the truth is, a lot of our families are kind of in a double bind because they don't even really speak Spanish that well. So imagine, I was talking to a mother the other day who was a victim of domestic violence and had a tough situation a bunch of years ago, but she spoke Tarasco, I think it's called, and literally had no one to speak to except for her husband who was abusing her, okay? She had 2 children who were getting abused as well. The state ended up, in Georgia, they ended up taking the children away from her. But you can imagine, I mean, she didn't know where she was, couldn't speak to anyone. You know, I think it tends to be that women from that area, from Mexico, would maybe have less Spanish skills than their husbands, just because of the amount of years people went to school. So, I mean, there's a lot of times where we have families who can't even really advocate for themselves in Spanish. I mean, imagine how hard that would be. I mean, it's really tough. So that's part of what I do to educate. I mean, part of what you have to do is slowly explain to these people, you know, they say, oh, you can't be in here, you know, we have a phone interpreter. That phone interpreter might as well be speaking Chinese. I mean, you know, they just are not going to understand that kind of, I don't know.
So we have 5 minutes, so maybe any pressing questions somebody really want to get out in here?
Kind of what I keep hearing is that the law isn't the end all be all. So is there other ways to go about not enforcing, but leading to better conditions for because the law, we get wrapped up in this time and the, did you do this, did you have standing? I mean, there's so much wrapped into being able to get into the courthouse. What else can we do? I mean, what?
I think everything boils down to education. I think if a lot of the workers knew that they actually had rights, they would at least have a leg to stand on when they even accept the job, you know, from the beginning. And a lot of our issue is that we go out and we do outreach, but then we have the crew leader and we have the grower that prevent us from getting on their property to even educate the workers because they don't want their workers educated on their rights. So what we've been trying to do is work with the Mexican consulate and with a lot of organizations that are based in Mexico to educate workers prior to even coming to the United States so that they know when they come, they're supposed to have a copy of their contract. They're not, you know, all of the facts are supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be promised, oh, when you get here, you'll get 40 hours a week, and then you come and, you know, because of whatever reason, other than an act of God, which is, you know, weather, anything that's uncontrolled by the grower, they're now being told that they're only going to get 10 hours a week. So if they knew that they don't have to stand for that, and then this new immigration reform would allow, if it goes, the H-2A worker, when they come, if they're working for, you know, Shaundra's farm, they have to stay with Shaundra's farm for the duration of their H-2A visa. However, if this immigration reform bill passes, they now have the option to work for Shaundra's farm and Professor's farm. If, you know, maybe I'm not making enough, you know, given enough hours, they can go over to this farm, or maybe they want to work 2 jobs. You know, they would have that freedom to move back and forth. So to answer your question, I think a lot of it just goes to education. And if you have education, maybe they'll be less afraid to come forward if they know their actual rights before they even get here.
So what I'd like to say about that is the rights applied to the 55,000 people in 2011 who got H-1A visas. There's 2 million undocumented workers probably in the United States. And you know, it's this old saying, you know, the only thing it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And you're the good man. You know, you're it. You're sitting right here. You're the ones who are, and the fact that we don't have a room full of people, we're competing with some very, very good other brown bags that are going on campus, unfortunately. But you're the ones who are here, right? So if you guys are doing nothing about this, well, who the hell is? I mean, we're the ones with rights here in this country. 2 million people. Think about the genocide of the Jews in Nazi Germany. That was 3 million in Germany and 3 million in Poland. Think of the scale here. We're at a similar scale, and we're sitting here.
No, I'm like the optimist. I think y'all being here, like I said, that's a good step. I'm the Peace Corps volunteer, right? I think like Americans are good people on the whole. You
Like
know what I mean?
Labradors, well-meaning and bouncy, but kind of silly. That's what I think about.
I think it's like it's like you don't want to know how the sausage is made, but at some point you got to go, what's going into the sausage? Like how are we getting this? Do you know what I'm saying? And I think education, knowing about it, just understanding, reading, visiting, all that's good. I think with that, I think people will slowly, maybe wheels of righteousness will turn to, I don't know, I'm positive.
Martin Luther King over here. I'm with Malcolm X.
I just think,
I'm with you.
I think a big thing is like literally just saying what y'all do. Wait a minute, how does this work, right? I mean, there's literally hundreds of people that drive down to Kiowa every day to that golf course down there, all those beautiful homes down there, right? Seabrook, all that down there. I don't think they realize there's a migrant camp right before they turn off to go to, it's literally on the road behind some trees hidden back there. They might not want to see it, maybe whatever, but I think just knowing about what's going on, educating yourself is a good first step. So
go visit one of the detention facilities for undocumented people who are being shipped home. That is probably the single best thing you can do to kickstart your own education if you haven't already done so. It's that's a moment for you.
Final questions? I think we're at 1:30. Ashley, please.
I just have a quick question. I probably directed more towards Shaundra, but you mentioned the difficulty in getting for growers to actually hire people as documented workers. And I know in South Carolina, most of our farmers are over the age of 60 and 70, and after working 13 hours a day, doing everything on the farm, I wonder if there's maybe that kind of issue where they don't either understand all of the processes or they just don't have time for it. Is there kind of a grower outreach that you guys do to kind of educate farmers on the importance of trying to hire?
That's interesting that you asked that question because we just started turning towards that type of outreach because we've been feeling like, we've been very farm worker, and these kind of things, and we've been getting a lot of complaints from growers saying that they didn't know. A lot of them are family run, and so it's like a catch-22. We want to advocate for the farm worker, and then at the same time, whatever settlement that we get may drive the farmer out of business. So, how can we work together to make it all work as one cohesive unit? So what we've been trying to do is organize with the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor is who enforces a lot of the housing, a lot of the wage and things like that of, the working agreements and stuff like that. So we've been working with the Department of Labor in an effort to start in the PD region, which is up in the Florence area, to outreach towards growers. We feel like there are a lot of growers that may not even know that there are educational resources out there for farm workers, that there are healthcare resources out there for farm workers that are free to the farm workers, and if you have healthy farm workers that would end up benefiting the grower. So we are trying to organize what we're calling a series of grower expos to where we can try to reach out to the grower and let them know these are the regulations, these are the rules, this is what you have to do if you want these particular type of workers, and just kind of, I think everything that we've said as far as how do we correct something, fix something, begin to kickstart anything has always begun, we keep going back to education and making sure that everyone is educated on what's going on. And I think, there are some bad apples out there, but I think for the most part, I think a lot of the growers are small. They don't know the ins and outs of the actual laws, and if they had some more information on it, maybe that will, work better as opposed to always, trying to file a lawsuit or fines and things of that nature, which even though we're punishing the grower, we end up inadvertently punishing the worker because with these fines, maybe now, next year, the grower can't afford to bring as many people back because of what happened the year before. So we are looking into those kind of initiatives.
You guys have cards by chance? Stefan, if people want to follow up, get in touch with Stefan, has email contacts. Also, anybody look for SURF grants? As you guys graduating, maybe not. So this might be a good topic for a SURF grant, work with a teacher to do some research and help with education.
We're doing
and
a pretty similar
publications.
project in Cambodia this summer, so anybody who's interested in investigating ecotourism and rural villages in Cambodia, come talk to me.
Are you guys open to interns?
Yes, very
Okay.
We have two right
So if you guys are environmental studies minors, look for an intern as well. Good opportunity as well. Thanks for coming, guys. Thanks for all. Next lunch is, do you guys already want to announce the next one, the date, and the topic? before
We're
we're here?
actually doing one for Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. So we're going to have 3 panelists on the homelessness side of the Lowcountry, and then one representative from Lowcountry Food Bank. And the food that we're going to have will be compliant with the SNAP benefit challenge of $5 a day. So
How's that gonna run? When are we gonna do that?
that is Wednesday, November 21st.
Wait, it's just a one-day challenge?
No, there's the whole week, but
What's the
that's
challenge
not
there?
That's right
through
before
Center
Thanksgiving.
Civic Engagement. Our actual event will be on the Wednesday during that week, though.
So do y'all know who gives out SNAP, by the way? Who like administers SNAP benefits, like food stamps?
It's a USDA, no?
Yes, but through the state of South Carolina. So what happens to a migrant farmer, anytime they move to a different state, they lose their SNAP benefits. They have to reapply.
Really?
Fantastic.
Yeah, if you think about it. Another problem.
I have a card if anybody wants a card.
She's organized.
Just this one time.
Thank you.